having a very strong unhealed egoic structure, it was easy for me to get into trouble, in one way or another. And, oh, let me open in my pain. Oh, let me open in my dreams. I know you are there. I know you are there. I listen.
It is so great to hear and see Jason again. He fills my heart with presence of the divine. It's great.
And love, and all that teaching that he offered you and that you were able to bring back to the Skills for Healing weekend retreats. And I thought that was an especially fun interview because we actually sang some of those short little songs we sang during the weekend retreats, and to hear him sing it himself and to reflect on what they mean, that was just wonderful.
Yeah. I thought the way that he was able to weave and integrate foundational teachings within the Buddhist and the Kabbalistic and Jewish and Christian tradition, perennial spiritual wisdom in engaging with suffering and discovering something quite remarkable.
Yeah, and he really focused on this experience that we're having right now is already divine. Whatever it is, if you're angry, if you're hurt, if you're resisting, if you have cancer, you're already immersed in the ocean of the divine.
Hi, I'm Dr. Rob Rutledge, oncologist and associate professor of medicine. I'm really excited to be co-hosting our Spirituality and Cancer podcast with hospital chaplain Rev David Maginley and psychotherapist Dr. Timothy Walker. Please join us in conversations with remarkable teachers, healers, and survivors as we explore the ways people can heal at levels of body, mind, and spirit, and how the cancer diagnosis can be transformed into a journey of the soul.
Welcome to the Spirituality and Cancer podcast. I'm here with my good friends and colleagues, Dr. Rob Rutledge and Dave Maginley, the chaplain at our cancer center. And I'm very excited to be interviewing my good teacher, very important teacher for me and healer, Jason Shulman. Welcome, Jason.
Thank you for inviting me, Tim.
So, Jason, I am very grateful to you for the time that I spent in your non-dual Kabbalistic healing training between 2000 and 2004, and then for other times coming to the summer programs. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to tell a little story about 1998 when I first went to Omega Institute to do the introductory training that you were doing, and you were introducing the healing of immanence in Asiya, and the healing of immanence, and this notion that divine presence and healing is always immanent in the physical world that we experience was very powerful for me, and I was really moved by that. And as we got into the program the weekend, and you talked more and more about that, and there was singing and lots of beautiful singing, the atmosphere became sort of more and more thick and more sparkling with this kind of luminosity. And it reminded me, because I had studied, say, about 15 years before with Chogyam Trungpa, and after a period of a 3-month retreat, he was teaching the highest level, pinnacle level of Tibetan Buddhism, Maha'ati and Dzogchen. And the atmosphere was the same atmosphere. It was this incredibly powerful, thick, sparkling, luminous presence where everything has this tremendous sense of import. And so I was very impressed that I was again transported into that kind of an atmosphere, and I decided to study Kabbalistic healing with you. And then that was right around the same time too that I met Rob, and then I started working on the creating the Skills for Healing Cancer retreats that integrate mindfulness. But also there was a phrase that kept coming into my mind that you had introduced us to, which is reclaiming our already existing wholeness, our already existing holiness.
Mhm.
So I just wanted to say that and tell that story to help people recognize that you are really embedded in the Skills for Healing weekend retreats that Rob and I have done for 20 years. And
It's wonderful.
yeah, so maybe that's a good place to start. I think it would be interesting to hear you talk about this notion of healing, and the suffering that we experience in everyday life and that people are experiencing with cancer, and where does that healing come from?
When I hear you talk about the atmosphere that was that you experienced that day, the language that I would use to talk about that now would be that there is a moment in spiritual work and in life in general, because many people come to this spontaneously and through other practices and so on, but the experience is the same when everything becomes self-illuminated.
Mm-hmm.
And the interesting thing about self-illumination is that it's an alchemical moment, and the alchemy is that it turns everything into itself.
Mm.
Things are no longer doing symbolic work for other things, but become 100% themselves. And when something becomes 100% itself, two things happen. It becomes self-illuminated, and it also takes its place in the totally connected continuity.
Mm.
So oneness and separateness become, well, we'll use Buddhist language, they become codependently arising.
Mm-hmm.
And there's no longer any a separateness between oneness, so-called, and separateness, so-called. So from the work that we do at a Society of Souls, that's where the healing comes from. There's many ways to look at healing. One way is that energy, divinity, insight is brought from one place to another. And that's one way to generate it. And certainly that type of work is very important, and this helps people. The whole, many aspects of the psychotherapeutic path are based on that, where someone shares their insight, and even if they're evoking it from the person themselves, they're still doing that type of work. The healing that comes from the type of work that we do is really from the reservoir of all things being themselves.
Mm.
It's really from this vast reservoir of in the Kabbalistic term, we'd call it the Briatic world, the Briatic, Bria and Asya, which is to say the highest spiritual interface in the down-to-earth human moment. So it's not something, the metaphor that I've always used, it's not something high, it's something low. It's as down-to-earth as possible. It's as ordinary as possible. If this ordinariness is encompassing, if it is the totality of one's being, then this wonderful thing happens, which is the already present divinity makes itself known, both in the person doing the healing and in the person being healed. So it's a kind of mutual revelation of isness, if you will, that has tremendous intelligence and tremendous power to heal, because it's working down at the level, not of subject and object, but at the level of the creative milieu itself.
Mm.
So once we have descended, to continue that metaphor, down to that level of creativity, anything can happen.
Yeah. So if people who are listening to this who are cancer patients and they're struggling accepting their diagnosis or dealing with suffering and the pain and the fear of cancer, how can they integrate that insight or seek out that kind of healing?
Well, the first thing I would never do would be to suggest to someone who has cancer that this is a great opportunity for their growth.
Mm.
Because that's kind of an expression of something coming from the outside. The first thing that I would have to do would be to say, oh my God, that's terrible.
Mm-hmm.
You must be very frightened. This is really a frightening moment. This is a difficult moment. How can I help?
Right.
At that point, you're, and this is not a maneuver, by the way. This is, it's not a strategy. It's how I feel. It is a terrible moment. And the first step in any kind of healing is to be truthful and to be aligned with the reality of the person you're speaking to, you're alive with, because it could happen to you in the next moment. And just because they are facing life and death at that moment, we're only not facing life or death because we're a little resistant and ignorant.
It's
But
a
we
very
are
comfortable
all the time.
state.
Say again?
It's a very comfortable state.
You mean ignorance and resistance?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
It's lovely.
Well, I think we've all majored in it at one time or another. I think I major in it, 5 times a day. And I work with myself constantly with that.
I love how you seem to be leaning into a state of authenticity and congruency rather than a state of being good or positive or strong.
Yeah, I mean, if strength is going to come, and here's another thing. We don't know what that strength is going to be used for. We could have a prior narrative that says, well, if we could get this person to be strong, according to our narrative or someone else's narrative, that's imposed, first of all, then they might heal themselves. But the type of strength that I'm talking about might be used for anything. It might be used to heal themselves. It might be used to die well. It might be used to make amends with people who they have not paid attention to or hurt in their lives, leaving a legacy of healing rather than a legacy of hurt. So we don't know exactly what that strength will be used for, but we do want to, and in this case, I guess I'm using the word strength synonymously with honesty, truth, things as they are, and all of those things. As those things are brought out, the divine is present. Tathagata is present. Isness is present.
Mm-hmm.
Buddha is present.
Jason, I know when you taught us about prayer, there was a lot of very similar kind of approach in that people opening up your vulnerability and being very honest about where you're at is the beginning of prayer. And it'd be really beautiful to hear you say a little bit about prayer in the 4 universes and how that...
Sure. Thank you for reminding me about that. Well, we called it Briatic prayer. And Briatic prayer is start where you are. Start exactly where you are. When you start where you are, allowing the totality of your being to be present, it literally doesn't matter if your prayer is a long series of curses. Dear God, I'll try to not curse, but just remembered, dear God, to hell with you. Screw you. I don't want, this is the worst thing. What kind of God are you? What kind of Buddha are you that I'm just getting into my life now and so on? What happens when we're, human beings cannot be perfect. There's never been a human being who's been perfect. And there's never been a human being who's been pure. And running after purity and perfection is the antithesis of the human state, which is filled with great courage and great stupidity, with great altruism and great selfishness. We're all foolish beings, according to the Pure Land School, to Jodo Shinsho, Pure Land Buddhism. You know, we make a vow, I will never do that again, and 2 minutes later, we have done it again 3 times. So we can't be pure. Running after, you know, the typical type of bargaining, which, by the way, even if a person did that, even if that was their first impulse to say, dear God, I will give up smoking. I will stop being a terrible person. I will be kinder to all people that I see. I will give up making money and devote myself to so on and so. Even that kind of bargaining needs to be accepted fully as the first instance, the first utterance of allowing somebody to be themselves completely. Everything that is allowed to exist exists in light. So it's that begins to happen, and then something takes charge. This same self-illuminating quality that I talked about before, let's call it a kind of force. When you are, the only thing we can rely on is honesty. We can't rely on our purity. It doesn't exist. We can't rely on our perfection. It doesn't exist. We can't even rely, and we can get into this at another time, it's a very big question, on our free will, because it doesn't exist. But we can rely to some extent on our honesty. So Briatic prayer, so-called, in the way we call it in our school, is a prayer of honesty, which means anything goes. But once that starts to happen, once that train starts to move, something begins to happen, and there is a natural integration. And I could say either elevation or deepening, just to use 2 opposite words that mean the same thing, or elevation of what we're saying. So I've heard prayers that start off angry, and then there's a pause, and then somebody says, so I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. And I'm so sad because I feel so alone. Well, now we've already changed one universe for another. And we're in a different perspective, a different plane. And now I'm so alone. And then out comes anguish and sadness. And after that comes out, something else happens and something else happens. It's a kind of braiding, or maybe it even stops there, because not every prayerful session goes to completion. It's a practice like anything else.
I'm so struck by this because in the Christian tradition, of course, I'm a Christian pastor, that is fully embodied in Jesus on the cross, who utters out, he's reciting one of the Psalms, says, my God, why have you forsaken me, right?
Right.
And it is enveloped in sadness and abandonment. And he's totally authentic with that.
Oh, it's so beautiful to hear you say that. It's so deeply touching. And, you know, that gospel, let's see, there's only one gospel that has that. I don't know if it's Luke or Matthew. What is it? Which one?
I'm embarrassed to say I'm not sure.
Okay, I don't know either. But I know it's only one gospel.
Yeah.
The other gospels couldn't bring themselves to say that God would say something like this, or God on earth, or God, Buddha, person, enlightened person, teacher, could say something like this. But what a lesson if we could, you know, if we could imitate Christ, you know, to use one of the great titles of one of the great books, Imitation of Christ. If we could imitate, so this form of prayer brings us to our feelings, brings us to our openness, brings us to our greatest intelligence. At that point, you get lucky. And you get lucky either to heal yourself, because you're in the natural milieu of creativity, or you get lucky to die a death that is satisfying to you somehow, or you get lucky, as I said before, to tell people how much you love them and how wonderful life has been to you, even in the midst of the pain. And just one last thing, just to say this, because I feel like I'm talking too much, but just one last thing, which is, even if the person doesn't die beautifully, all the other people around that person need to see that that's okay too. That that's not a failure of some sort of either the helpers or of the person. Because one of my teachers, Jinen Jason Roshi, said, there's no right way to die. And that was a great lesson to me.
So in this perspective or dynamic, a posture of prayer, your prayer will not give you what you desire, but it will reveal what you fundamentally are.
It's kind of like a Rolling Stones prayer, I guess. You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometimes, you get what you need.
Yes.
So yes, I agree exactly, David, with what you just said. It gives you, could you say that again? I want to hear those words again.
Prayer does not give you what you desire. It reveals what you are.
Already are.
Yeah.
And it sounds like the Kabbalistic teaching is that fundamentally you are fully connected to the divine. How could it be otherwise? You emanate from that. And I don't know if in Kabbalistic teaching matter is the densest form of spirit, or but this descending into.
No, there's no separation.
Yes.
Between matter and spirit.
No.
There's the illusion that they're separate, and it's pervasive. It's understandable. But yeah.
Jason, can I ask you to also reflect on your life? I understood that at one point you became very ill, and really it's quite possible, like maybe many of the people who are listening to the podcast, they could be nearing the end of their life. They could have an incurable cancer. The odds could be against you. What insights did you develop? How was your journey like somebody who's had a cancer diagnosis, and what insights came up for you during that incredibly difficult time?
I would say no insights came up for me. Instead, what came up for me was the weakening of my body was also the weakening of my defensive posture against reality. So it wasn't so much, for me, some sort of penetrating Herculean effort or revelation or Damascus moment or of some sort of Kensho Satori kind of thing. It was more like getting thinner and thinner. And the things that I desperately wanted in my life, but could not have, because my defensive structure was such, my wounding from my childhood was such that I didn't know how to get them. I didn't know how to really get what I wanted. But as I grew weaker, I was prepared to receive much more than I was capable of receiving before that, because I was more and more helpless. So it would be difficult to tell somebody, well, you have a terrible disease now, but as you get more helpless, something good might come of it. But you don't have to say that, because if someone had said that to me, that would have just sparked my defensive position. What are you telling me? I'm going to this, that, and the other thing. Instead, you know, in Zen, there's a saying, illness makes its own medicine.
Mm.
And I guess that's what happened to me. My illness made its own medicine in the form of weakness. I have to tell you, just as an aside, it's not part of our purview here, so I hope it doesn't make people confused. But that became such a go-to way of growing for me that as I healed, becoming strong was very difficult because I feared I would lose my openness.
Mm.
And I had to do a lot of work to begin to understand how to combine openness and love with strength, and not only from a weakened position. But that's later in my path than what you're asking about.
It's still extremely valuable, so thank you. Yeah.
Oh, how the ego would love to jump in and just enjoy that newfound strength on the surface layer and
Well,
not dwell in the...
it does. It was immediate. It's not
Yeah.
because as one gets weaker, all the psychic parts get weaker, and other psychic parts which have been overlaid have a chance to come out and play, like love and caring and compassion and the sense of the cherry blossoms falling and how delicate and precious life is. And then you get a little strong, and yeah, I don't have to think about that anymore. You know, now I'm back being tough.
We often hear patients ask about, or speak of the purpose in suffering. Well, we're trying to language something that quite mysterious, but certainly the effect of suffering is the deconstruction of the ego to reveal deeper parts of...
I would never use deconstruction of ego for my particular work. I know there are different traditions. I would say healing the ego.
Healing.
Because the ego is God has never been stupid in creating individuals over and over and over for the whole universe. So this is part of the divine milieu itself to have created individual egos. So I don't see the ego ever, from my Buddhist work, from my kabbalistic work, ever as evil or bad or anything like that at all. I see it as being unhealed. When the ego is healed, it's a vital and important part. You guys know this. It's like an important and vital part of what makes a human being and what makes you guys different from me and me different from you, and also makes us brothers because we're in the same boat.
All part of this great universal identity experience.
Yeah.
Right.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Jason, you used the word in talking about your own sickness of you came to receive. I was so weak that I was able to receive. And I know that receive is an essential word in Kabbalah.
Yes.
So can you say a little bit more about that? Because that's something that we do in our programs too, this being open to receive.
Again, I have to reframe that a little bit.
Yeah.
Sometimes we're not open to receive.
Right.
What are you going to do then? So what we have to receive is who we are at any one moment. If a person is told, and this is again my path, so if it differs from your paths, please translate it into ways that make sense to you. But if a person is told, please be open to receive, and they're feeling terrified, contracted, scared, angry, so on and so on, and then they can't open up, they just can't, then piled on top of that is additional self-hatred because they're not good enough. Yeah. And they're desperately trying to become good enough because they're trying to heal. And they have now made a connection. If I was good enough, I would heal. But they're not good enough, so they're not going to heal. So receive for me means receive what is. So if a person is like this, I would say, be like that. It's not all of you. It's a part of you. it's the part that's predominant right now. Be contracted. I'm going to be here with you anyway, even if you're contracted. It's okay with me for you to be that.
You're right.
It's not evil, it's not bad, and it's not going to hurt your healing either. Well,
and ironically, in your compassionate presence, they probably would open and not contract. They would open to what is.
they probably would.
Mm.
They probably would. But I hope that's because I care more for their narrative than mine.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want my narrative of what openness is to be their openness. If they can come to the point where they accept that, then automatically it flowers into just what you talked about. That's that movement in prayer that happens as well. Because the universe is a strange universe. It's built of creation destruction. It's not just built of creation. All of creation is married to destruction, and destruction is married to creation. So these things have a tendency of being able to live together better than we know how to do that. And manifestation happens from that. And we want this person to manifest, continue manifesting, continue to be alive. But that's, again, up to more than just our narrative and good wishes.
Jason, I'm also very excited to have you on the program because Tim did the teachings of the weekend retreats, and he brought back some of these short little songs that you've created over the years.
Yes.
And we have a tradition of the final circle. So if the whole weekend retreat is done, the incredible energies in the air, and we sing a song together as one of the last songs. And I'll sing it now, recognizing that I'm a terrible singer, and that's totally fine.
And I'll help you. We'll do it together, that one. Oh, let me open in my pain. Oh, let me open in my dreams. I know you are there. I know you are there. I listen.
Oh, let me open. I haven't sung that one in so long. Oh.
Well, it's embedded. It's embedded in my soul. So I'm extremely grateful to you. But I wanted you to reflect. What are we like? What's the listening? Can you offer kind of insight as to why you wrote that riff?
I wrote in the tradition, in the Kabbalistic tradition of nigun, nigunim, the plural, which traditionally were these Hasidic wordless songs. They were like bye dai dai da da dai 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 da da dai da da dai 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 da 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 dai da da dai da da, and so on. But I always have something to say, so I put words. So I think all of these nigunim came from my own experience. And for myself, and maybe this is true for all of you, I'm sure it is. I'm sure this is universal. There's always a voice inside of us, right? It doesn't matter if you're an Advaitist in non-duality, or a Vajrayana practitioner, or a Theravadan practitioner, or a Muslim, or in one of the deistic religions, or Jew, or whatever. There's still always a voice someplace in there. And it's a simple voice. And it could say detailed messages, in which case you channel them, or it could say it's okay, or it says you can calm down, or it says it's filled with the simplest wisdom. So, to use myself as an example, having a very strong unhealed egoic structure, it was easy for me to get into trouble. you know, in one way or another. And oh, let me open in my pain. Oh, let me open in my dreams. I know you are there. I know you are there. I listen. You know, in Pure Land Buddhism, the whole point of Pure Land Buddhism is to say a chant, Namu Amida Butsu. I take refuge in Amida Buddha. And in the practice of that, one comes to a realization at a certain point that our calling to Amida Buddha, the Buddha of life and light, was met by Buddha calling us. So there's a stage where we realize, wait a minute, we're being called by Buddha as we call Buddha. And then we realize that that calling is in us already. Otherwise, we wouldn't recognize the calling from the outside, right? It's like saying Christ is in us. Yeah. Otherwise, we wouldn't understand who Christ is and who Christ, how Christ comes.
We can resonate.
It has to, right, exactly. It's the harmonic. The C note has to be in us, speaking of Christ. The C note has to be in us. If C is going to pluck, the universal C is going to pluck, it has to resonate. So at a certain point, you realize I listen is already the voice of God. Listening is already the voice of God. Mm-hmm. So we're plugged in at that point.
Beautiful.
And we also sing at the end of as Rob was saying, we sing, "Oh, let me be an open-hearted man.
Oh, let me be an open-hearted woman. Oh, let me be the one who understands. Oh, let me be the one who's filled with wisdom." I love that one.
Yeah, so that's celebratory at the end. We do that.
It is. You know, and sometimes people have said to me, well, I feel very egocentric saying, I want to be filled with wisdom. And I say, that's okay. Better be filled with wisdom. Then you'll take care of the ego part. Don't worry about it. Ask. Mm-hmm. Ask. I ask all the time.
Jason, it's been so terrific to spend this time with you again. I just love hearing you talk and hearing you sing and being part of your world.
I enjoyed being here so much. I really did.
Yeah, thank you. And I wanted to show people, I have just a couple of your books here. I have the Kabbalistic Healing book, which is really beautiful and very dense, and this gorgeous, beautiful book about receiving, the instruction manual for receiving God. So, and you have many other writings and wonderful things, and people can go to your website, the Society of Souls, and also Kabbalistic Healing to discover more about you.
Yeah, just Society of Souls. And if they also want to go to, we have a not-for-profit, which is called the Foundation for Non-Duality. Mm-hmm. And they can go there, and there's all sorts of readings and things that we put up there for free and so on, and video stuff. They just go there and swim a little bit.
Terrific. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jason.
You're very welcome. David, it's nice meeting you and listening to you, and Rob as well. And Tim, I love you.
I love you too.
So, thank you again.
Thank you for listening to our Spirituality and Cancer podcast. If you'd like to learn more or have questions, comments, or suggestions, please contact us at healingandcancer.org.